The night Che Min Huang decided to ruin his own luck of life, the temperature in Seoul had dropped to -14, and the Han River was making sounds like something dying underneath the ice. He had just watched a man beg for his life beneath the Mapo Bridge, and felt nothing. 38 years old, the most dangerous man in the city, feared by prosecutors, politicians, and every criminal organization operating between Incheon and Busan. He had built an empire on silence and broken bones. And then a 9-year-old girl looked him in the eye and told him his money was worthless. That was the night everything changed. If you've made it this far, hit like, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what comes next will cost you sleep. The meeting under the bridge had run 40 minutes longer than it was supposed to. Jamin stood at the edge of the concrete embankment, hands loose at his sides, watching the two men from the Incheon faction climb back into their black SUV and pull away without headlights. Smart. The kind of smart that came from being afraid. He'd cultivated that fear over 18 years with methodical patience. A broken wrist here, a torched warehouse there, a message delivered through the right silence at the right time. Fear was the only currency that never depreciated. He believed that the way other men believed in their families or their retirement accounts. His breath came out in white clouds, -14 and dropping. Behind him, his driver Chulsu waited by the car with the engine running, exhaust curling up into the black sky. Jamin didn't move toward the car. He had a habit, bad habit, his Lieutenant Min Seok always called it, of standing alone after these meetings, just standing, letting the cold work through the wool overcoat, letting whatever had happened in the last hour settle into something he could carry without it showing on his face. The Mapo Bridge groaned somewhere above him, ice shifting in the river below. He was reaching into his coat pocket for his cigarettes when he heard it. Not a voice. Not at first. More like a sound. A small, wet, animal sound, coming from the dark space under the nearest bridge support column, where the concrete met the frozen ground and created a hollow just wide enough for a man to crouch in. Jamin's hand stopped moving inside his coat pocket. His eyes adjusted. A child. No. 2 children. The older one was sitting with her back against the concrete column, knees pulled up, arms wrapped around a smaller figure bundled against her chest. The smaller figure wasn't moving. The older one was watching Jamin with the kind of stillness that didn't come from calm. It came from having calculated every possible exit and found none. She looked about 9, maybe 10. Hard to tell under the grime. Her coat was a man's jacket 3 sizes too large, the sleeves cut off at the elbow and re-sewn with what looked like electrical wire. Her feet were wrapped in plastic bags over thin socks, stuffed into a pair of shoes that didn't match. Her face was sharp, the kind of face malnutrition carves into children who should still have baby fat, and her eyes were a peculiar color in the ambient light reflecting off the ice, something between brown and amber, and they did not look away from him. Jamin took his empty hand out of his pocket. "How long have you been there?" he said. Not a question. A statement delivered flatly, the way he delivered most of his sentences. The girl didn't answer. He took 1 step forward. She tensed. Not dramatically, not with tears or screaming, just a microscopic shift in her body positioning that told him she had already decided what she would do if he came closer. She would fight. She would lose, obviously, but she had already decided she would fight. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "That's what they all say." Her Korean was Seoul dialect, but worn down at the edges, scrubbed of any particular neighborhood. The voice of someone who had learned to speak without leaving a trail. Jamin stopped moving. He studied the bundle in her arms. "Is that your brother?" A pause, then, barely, "He's sick." "How sick?" She didn't answer, which meant badly. He crouched down so he was at her eye level, which he did not normally do for anyone. The concrete was cold through the fabric of his trousers. He could smell them from here. The particular smell of children who had been outside in Korean winter for days, sweat and cold, and something underneath that he recognized without wanting to name it. He'd smelled it before. In certain rooms, in certain memories he didn't revisit. "What do you need?" he said. She studied him for a moment. He could see her running calculations behind those amber eyes. "Are you with them?" she asked. With who? The men. The ones from before. We heard everything. He felt something tighten in his chest. Not alarm. Not exactly. More like recognition of a very specific problem. You heard what? Enough. She said it without blinking. Enough that you probably want to make sure we don't talk. Jamin looked at her for a long moment. If that were true, he said quietly, you'd already be in the river. She absorbed this, didn't flinch, just kept looking at him with those calculating eyes. Then what do you want? I asked first, what do you need? Another long pause. He could tell she was fighting herself, fighting the habit of refusal, the trained instinct not to want things from strangers, especially men in expensive overcoats standing under bridges at 2 a.m. Then she said, food, real food, not convenience store. I have money. I don't want money. Flat. Final. The way someone speaks when they've been offered money before and know exactly what that offer usually costs. Food, something hot, he needs to eat, he hasn't eaten since… She stopped. Reset. Since a while, Shaman stood up. He turned toward Chul Su, who was watching from 30 meters away with the expression of a man who had learned not to ask questions. Go get food, Jamin said. Whatever you can find open right now. Rice, soup, something hot. Enough for 2 children. Chul Su didn't move for half a second. Boss, did I stutter? Chul Su went. Jamin turned back to the girl. She was still watching him. Still had that stillness about her. The held breath quality of someone waiting for the other shoe. What's your name? He said. A pause. Then, like she was offering him something she wasn't sure she should. Nyla. That's not a Korean name. No. And your brother? Day. The first time her voice had changed at all. A slight softening, almost imperceptible. His name is Day. Jamin looked at the small bundled figure again. The boy wasn't making noise. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Sick children usually made noise. They cried, or they coughed, or they called for their mothers. The fact that this one was silent meant something. Let me see him, he said. No. I need to see how sick he is. I said no. Her arms tightened around the bundle. You don't touch him. He studied her. The protectiveness was remarkable. Not frantic, not hysterical, just absolute. Like a closed door. Like a wall she had decided to build and would spend everything she had maintaining. He had seen that quality before, in men twice her age, half of whom were dead now. The ones who weren't, he'd kept close. All right, he said. We wait for the food. They waited. Chul Su came back in 11 minutes with ramen from a 24-hour pojangmatcha 3 blocks over. Proper broth, thick noodles, the kind that cost 4 times the convenience store equivalent. He'd gotten 2 portions plus a container of rice, and he carried it all with the careful hands of a man who understood, on some instinctive level, that this mattered in a way he couldn't quite define yet. Jamin took the bags from him and set them on the ground in front of the girl. He stepped back. She looked at the food, then at him, then at the food. Then she did something that surprised him. She pulled back the jacket around her brother and tried to wake him, gently first, then with more urgency. The boy didn't respond the way a sleeping child responds. He made a sound, barely a sound, more like a breath with a hitch in it, and his eyes opened to about half, unfocused. Jamin looked at the boy's face for 2 seconds and felt everything in his chest rearrange. The child had the slack, flushed look of a fever that had been running for days. His lips were slightly blue at the corners. His breathing was wrong, labored in a way that even Jamin, who had no medical training beyond stitching himself up in bathrooms, could identify as not normal, not just a cold wrong. This was the sound of fluid in lungs. This was pneumonia. This was a child who was dying. We need to go, he said. Right now. He needs a hospital. We can't go to a hospital. Neela's voice had gone tight. Why? Because they ask questions, and then they call people. And then… She stopped. And then what? She looked at him. For the first time, something cracked in her face. Not tears, just a fine fracture in the controlled surface, the particular expression of someone who has been running a very long time and is very tired. We don't have anyone, she said. If they find out we don't have anyone, they separate us. I can't. He's all I. She stopped again, set her jaw. I'm not going to a hospital. Jamin crouched back down. He looked at her very directly and spoke without softening it. If you don't take him to a hospital in the next hour, he said, he will die under this bridge. Silence. The river groaned. I know, she said, so quietly he almost didn't hear it. I know. He held out his hand. I know people at Severance Hospital. No questions. No records that go anywhere you don't want them to go. My word. She looked at his hand for what felt like a long time. Then she looked up at his face. Really looked. The way children sometimes do when they haven't yet learned to pretend they're not reading you. And whatever she found there made her decision. She didn't take his hand. Instead, she gathered her brother against her chest and stood up on her own, carefully, the way you carry something precious and breakable. If you're lying, she said, I'll find a way to make you regret it. He almost smiled. I don't doubt that. The drive to Severance took 18 minutes. Jamin made 3 calls from the back seat, brief, specific, in the clipped language of a man who was used to problems being solved without elaboration. By the time they reached the emergency entrance, a doctor was already waiting. No intake desk, no forms, no questions asked in the hearing of the girl who sat in the back seat with her brother's head in her lap, one hand stroking his hair with a steadiness that didn't match her face. They took Day on a gurney. Nyla walked beside it all the way to the doors of the treatment room, and then a nurse gently but firmly stopped her from going further. She stood at the closed doors for a moment, both hands flat against them, and then she turned and found Jamin standing 6 feet away. You should eat, he said. He was holding one of the food containers from the pojangmacha, lid still on, still faintly warm. She looked at the food, then at the doors, then at him. She took the food. She sat down in a plastic chair along the wall and ate with the methodical efficiency of someone who has trained themselves not to taste things, not to want things, just to fuel the machine. Jamin sat down 3 chairs away and said nothing. He did not make additional calls. He did not check his phone. He just sat there in the fluorescent light of the hospital corridor with the smell of antiseptic in the air and the sound of the girl eating ramen and waited. The doctor came out 92 minutes later. He spoke to Jamin first, by instinct, and Jamin redirected him with a look toward the girl. The doctor hesitated. She was clearly a child, clearly a minor. And then something in Jamin's expression convinced him to stop calculating and just speak the truth. Pneumonia, bilateral. 3, possibly 4 days untreated. They had stabilized the fever, started antibiotics, he was on oxygen. He was alive. But the next 12 hours were critical. The next 12 hours. Nyla listened with her hands flat on her thighs and her face still. When the doctor finished and went back through the doors, she sat there for a moment and then she put her face in her hands. She didn't make noise. Her shoulders didn't shake. It was the most controlled thing Jamin had ever seen from anyone in any situation, and he had spent his adult life surrounded by men who prided themselves on not showing weakness. He didn't say anything. She didn't want him to. Around 4 in the morning, a nurse brought blankets. Nyla took one, wrapped it around herself in the chair, and was asleep within minutes. Instantly, completely, the sleep of total physical exhaustion. Even asleep, her face held a tension at the corners that Jamin recognized. He'd seen it in mirrors. He did not sleep. He sat with his elbows on his knees and his hands loose between them and watched the corridor and thought about nothing in particular and everything at once, the way he had trained himself to do in the years before he had learned that thinking too much was its own kind of poison. Min Seok arrived at 6. He appeared at the end of the corridor, tall, lean, impeccably dressed even at this hour, the kind of put-together that spoke less of vanity and more of discipline, of a man who controlled his appearance the way he controlled everything else in his environment. He was 34, Jamin's right hand for 7 years, the person who ran logistics, finances, personnel, the entire architecture of the organization that Jamin built and Min Seok maintained. He was good at it, frighteningly good. The kind of good that sometimes made other men in the organization uncomfortable in ways they couldn't articulate and therefore didn't. He looked at the sleeping girl, then at Jamin. "What's this?" he said. "A child." "I can see that. Her brother's in treatment, pneumonia." Min Seok waited. When Jaemin didn't continue, he said carefully, "We should talk about the Incheon meeting. There are some... Not here." "Boss, I said not here." Jaemin's voice didn't rise. It never needed to. "Come back at noon." Min Seok looked at the girl again. His expression was professional. Not cold exactly, more like a man doing a calculation, assigning a value, filing a result. "She saw the meeting," he said. It wasn't a question. "She heard. She's a child under a bridge in the middle of winter. She heard enough to be a problem." "She is not a problem." Jaemin said it the way he ended conversations, with a finality that had the weight of every consequence it implied behind it. Noon. Min Seok left. He didn't argue. He never argued. That was one of the things Jaemin valued most about him. He understood hierarchies. He understood that some decisions had already been made and that the cost of challenging them was higher than the cost of compliance. What Jaemin did not understand, would not understand for years, was that Min Seok also understood something else, that patience was a weapon, that the most dangerous thing a subordinate could do was wait. The morning came in gray through the hospital windows. The city reassembled itself outside. Taxis, buses, the industrial machinery of a metropolis, getting back to work after a night it barely noticed. Jaemin got coffee from a machine in the corridor. It was terrible. He drank it anyway. Nyla woke up at 7:15 with her hand already moving toward the treatment room doors before she was fully conscious. Old habit. The habit of checking, confirming, verifying that the thing you needed to protect was still there. She sat up, looked at the doors, looked at Jaemin. "He's alive," Jaemin said. "No news is good news." She looked at him for a moment with those amber eyes. Awake now, sharp again, the exhaustion pushed back behind the working machinery of her face. "You stayed," she said. "I don't walk away from things I've started." She considered this. "That's not always a good thing." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." The doctor came at 9. The fever had broken around dawn. The antibiotics were working. The next 24 hours would tell the full story, but the boy was stabilized, the crisis had passed, and barring complications, which the doctor said carefully, watching the girl's face, he should recover fully. Should. Nyla sat with that word for a moment. Then she nodded once, and the doctor went back through the doors and she looked at her hands in her lap. "Thank you," she said. She said it the way a person says something they've decided to say rather than something they feel. Not dishonest, just formal, controlled, as if gratitude was another thing that could be weaponized against you if you let it show too freely. "Don't," Jaemin said. She looked up. "Don't thank me yet. You don't know what I want." The directness of it seemed to land differently than she expected. Not as a threat. She had already threat assessed him multiple times and filed her conclusions. More like respect. Like he was speaking to her as an equal rather than as a problem to be managed. "Then what do you want?" she said. "I don't know yet." He looked at the treatment room doors. "I want to know how 2 children ended up under a bridge in -14 weather in January." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "We were in a group home, in Mapo. The supervisor was..." She stopped. "He was the kind of man who shouldn't be around children. When I found out he was going to move Day to a different facility, to separate us, I took Day and we left. That was 11 days ago. 11 days. Jaemin did the math. 11 days in Seoul winter, January, on the streets, with a sick child, at 9 years old. He did not show what that calculation did to him. Is there anyone? Family? No. No one. Our mother died when Day was 2. We don't know about the father. There's no one." She said it without self-pity, without drama, just as information. The way you state a fact about geography or weather. "There's never been anyone." He was quiet. Outside, a bus went past, the sound muffled by the hospital glass. He turned the empty coffee cup in his hands. "I have a house," he said, "in Seongbuk-dong. It's large enough. Too large, actually. For one person." He stopped. Started again. "I'm not offering charity." He said the word like it tasted wrong. "I'm asking if you want a place to be while your brother recovers. After that..." He paused. After that is a different question. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. You're a criminal, she said. Not accusatory, just accurate. Yes. Those men, under the bridge, you were making a deal. Yes. And you don't care that I know that. You already know it. The question of whether I care stopped being relevant about 8 hours ago. He looked at her directly. You're not stupid. Don't pretend the offer doesn't make sense. A long silence. She looked at the treatment room doors, at the corridor, at her hands. She had the posture of someone doing an enormous amount of work inside a very still exterior, weighing, calculating, looking at the angles. Finally, she looked back at him. If you're going to use this, she said carefully, whatever leverage you think having us means, if that's what this is, I don't need leverage from a 10-year-old. 9. I'm 9. Something flickered across her face, briefly, almost amusement, then gone. Almost 10. 9, he corrected. And I'm making you an offer because He stopped. Something in his face moved, something brief and uncharacteristic. Because standing here and walking away is something I'm not willing to do. That's the only honest answer I have. He looked at the floor. I've made a lot of decisions in my life. Smart decisions, strategic decisions. Every one of them with a calculation behind it. This is the first stupid decision I've made deliberately. I'm aware of what it is. She studied him. Why? He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter. Because you told that man his money was worthless. And you were right. And I've spent 38 years not understanding that. The treatment room doors opened. A nurse leaned out. Ms. She looked at the girl uncertainly, not sure what to call her. You can see him now, he's awake. Nyla was out of the chair before the sentence finished. She pushed through the doors. Jaemin caught a glimpse before they swung shut. A small boy in a white bed with tubes and oxygen and the bloated, feverish look of a child who had been seriously ill. And beside him a girl who moved to his bedside and took his hand and finally, let something out of her face. Jaemin stayed in the corridor. He sat back down in the plastic chair and looked at the ceiling and thought about what he had just done. Not strategically, not tactically, just looked at it plainly, the way you hold something up to light. He had brought a child to his hospital. He had made promises about records and questions to doctors who were afraid of him. He had offered a home, his home, to 2 orphaned children with no documentation, no legal status, no connection to anything in his world. He had done this because a 9-year-old girl with plastic bags on her feet had looked at him and not looked away. Min-seok was right. She was a problem, but not the kind he meant. Dai died at 11:47 in the morning. The doctor came out of the treatment room alone. He didn't need to say anything. Jaemin could read it in his posture and the particular quality of the quiet that preceded him. The antibiotics had been working, the fever had broken, and then something else had happened. A complication, a cascade of events that the doctor would explain in careful medical language that would not make it more understandable. And the small boy's lungs had filled with what they could not clear, and his small heart had given out, and there was nothing. There was nothing anyone could have done, the doctor said. 11 days in the cold. Too long. Too much damage. Too deep in. Jaemin stood in the corridor and listened to all of it, and felt something in his chest that he had no clean word for. Through the treatment room doors, nothing. No sound. Which was worse than sound. He went in. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her brother's hand in both of hers. Her face. He had watched that face for 8 hours. He had watched it hold every terrible thing it had been required to hold. Now it held something that was past expression, something that existed before language, before the learned armor of controlled reaction. It was just a child, just a 9-year-old girl with the face of someone who had lost the only thing that mattered. He sat down in the chair beside the bed. Not beside her, beside the bed. Not touching her, not speaking. He sat there. After a long time, she said, very quietly, to her brother's face more than to Jaemin, I should have gone sooner. I waited too long. I was afraid. Her voice cut off, came back. I was afraid of what would happen if we went somewhere and they separated us. And then they separated us anyway. You couldn't have known, Jaemin said. I should have known. Flat, final. The same tone she used for everything. but with something underneath it now that was pure, undiluted grief packed tight into those 4 words. She leaned down and pressed her forehead against her brother's hand. Stayed there. Jamin looked at the small boy's face. 7 years old, maybe. The particular stillness of a child who had died. Different from sleep, unmistakable once you had seen it. He had seen it before in his life. He had caused it before in his life. The fact that he could think those 2 thoughts at once and keep sitting in that chair was either the measure of his damage or his endurance. He wasn't sure there was a difference. His name was Day, she said, without lifting her head. I know. He liked fire trucks. He wanted to be a firefighter. A pause. He was afraid of the dark, but he never told anyone because he thought I'd worry. Another pause. Longer. I knew anyway. Jamin said nothing. There was nothing to say. He had lived long enough to know that silence was sometimes the only honest response to grief, and that filling it with words was usually for the benefit of the person who couldn't tolerate their own discomfort, not for the person who was suffering. She lifted her head eventually, looked at her brother's face for a long moment. Then she looked at Jamin, and her face had changed in a way that was subtle and irreversible, the way a fracture changes the structure of something even after it's been sealed. Your offer, she said. Does it still stand? Yes. Then I accept. She set her brother's hand down carefully against the blanket. She stood up. She was 9 years old, and she was 3 feet 4 inches tall, and she had just lost everyone she had in the world, and she was standing up straight. I accept because I have nowhere else to go, and because you were honest with me. And those are the only 2 reasons. She looked at him. Don't make me regret it. I'll try, he said, which was, he realized, the most honest thing he had said to anyone in years. She walked out of the room. He followed. In the corridor, she stopped and looked back through the glass at her brother's still form on the white bed, and something crossed her face. Not a goodbye, exactly, because that was too final, too much weight for any expression to carry. Just a looking. A memorizing. The thing you do when you have to leave something behind and you want to hold the image of it precisely. Then she turned and walked toward the exit, and Jamin fell into step beside her. Outside, the city was cold and loud and relentlessly indifferent, the way cities are. A cab nearly clipped a delivery bike on the street in front of the hospital. Someone was arguing into a phone on the corner. The sky was that particular winter white that meant more snow before evening. Nyla stopped on the sidewalk and looked up. The buildings, the traffic, the grinding, ordinary enormousness of a city that had not noticed or cared about anything that had happened in the last 12 hours. She looked at all of it for a moment with those amber eyes. Then she looked at Jamin. What do you expect from me, she said. Living in your house. What do you expect? Nothing. That's not true. No, he admitted. It's not. But I don't know yet what's true. I know I don't want a transaction. I've had enough of those. He met her eyes. I want... He stopped. Something moved across his face that he wasn't accustomed to feeling in it. I want to see what you become. That's the honest answer. I want to see what a person like you becomes. She considered this for a moment. Then, you might not like what I become. Probably not, he said. She almost smiled again. Not quite. But the shape of it was there, at the corner of her mouth, just for a second. Then she looked away, at the street, at the moving city. I have one condition, she said. Name it. I study, whatever I want, however I want. No one tells me what to learn. She paused. And no one tells me what to forget. Jamin looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. They walked to the car. Chulsu held the door open with the expression of a man who had stopped being surprised by his employer approximately 4 years ago, but had not yet stopped being uncertain. Neela got in. Jamin got in. The door closed. As the car pulled out into the Seoul traffic, Nyla sat very still with her hands in her lap and her face at the window. Jamin sat on his side of the seat and looked at nothing in particular and turned over in his mind, carefully, the full scope of what he had done. One night. One meeting that ran long. One child under a bridge who would not look away. He had built his empire on the certainty that nothing could touch him, on the principle that attachment was a structural weakness and sentiment was a tool his enemies used against people who had not learned better. He had held that principle for 18 years, and it had served him well, had kept him alive, had kept his organization intact, had kept him one step ahead of the prosecutors and the rivals and the men who underestimated him right up until the moment they didn't get to underestimate anyone anymore. And then a 9-year-old girl had refused his money, and he had sat in a hospital corridor all night and watched something he couldn't name unfold in his chest, and now there was a child in his car. Somewhere in the city, Min Seok was waiting for a noon meeting that Jae-min was going to be late to. Somewhere in that same city, in a building that none of them could name yet, the machinery of the conspiracy that would eventually try to destroy everything Jae-min had built was already in motion, patient, invisible, tended by the one person Jae-min trusted most. But none of that had arrived yet. It was still January. It was still cold. There was still time, though none of them knew it, before the long unraveling would begin. Nyla turned from the window. She looked at him. "What do I call you?" she said. He had never been asked that question before. Not like that. Not by someone deciding deliberately what the relationship was going to be called. He thought about it for a moment. "Jae-min?" he said. She shook her head, almost imperceptibly. "That's not what I'm asking." He looked at her. She looked back. And in the silence between them, in the moving car on the winter street in the city neither of them fully belonged to, something settled, something neither of them acknowledged out loud, something that had no name yet, but already had weight. "We'll figure it out," he said finally. She turned back to the window. "Yes," she said quietly. "We will." The car moved through the city. The snow began to fall. The house in Seongbuk-dong was the kind of place that had been designed to communicate power without announcing it. No gate guards with visible weapons. No surveillance cameras mounted in obvious positions. Just a high stone wall, a steel gate that opened without sound, and a house set back from the street behind a garden that in summer would be beautiful, and in January was a grid of bare branches and frozen ground that looked like something stripped down to its skeleton. Nyla got out of the car and stood on the gravel drive and looked at it. All of it, the size of the main building, the secondary structure to the east that was probably a staff quarters, the lights on in several rooms despite the early hour, which meant people, staff, a whole apparatus of domestic maintenance that she had never been inside of. "It's big," she said. "Yes." "How many people live here?" 3 staff, full-time, and me." He paused. "Now 4 staff. And me, and you." She looked at him. "I'm not staff." "No." He said it without hesitation. "You're not." She turned back to the house. Something moved across her face. Not awe, not gratitude, just a kind of intense assessment, the way you look at a territory you're going to have to learn. She was still wearing the oversized jacket, the plastic bag shoes. She had nothing else. Everything she had in the world was currently on her body, and she was standing in front of a house that cost more than most people made in a decade and looking at it like she was deciding whether it was structurally sound. Jae-min walked past her toward the entrance. "Come inside. It's cold." She followed. One step behind, slightly to his left, not submissive, just tactical, already reading the geography. Inside, a woman named Mrs. Park, 50s, compact, with the expression of someone who had worked for Jae-min long enough to have stopped being shocked by anything, met them in the entrance hall. She looked at Nyla, looked at Jae-min, said nothing, which was its own kind of eloquence. "She needs clothes," Jae-min said, "a room, food when she wants it." He paused. "She decides when she eats and what she eats. Nobody makes that choice for her." Mrs. Park looked at the child again, at the jacket, at the shoes, at the particular combination of grime and dignity that Nyla wore without apparent awareness. "Of course," she said. Nyla looked at Mrs. Park with the careful eyes of someone assessing a new variable. "I don't need anyone to do things for me," she said. Not rudely, just informatively. "You need a bath," Mrs. Park said with exactly the same tone. A beat. Then Nyla, almost imperceptibly, "Yes, that's fair." Jae-min left them to it. He went to his study, a room at the back of the house that looked onto the dead garden. Shelves of financial reports and legal documents that were not the kind of thing you left visible to casual visitors. A desk that had not been cleared of anything important because no one entered this room without being invited. He sat down. He put his hands flat on the desk and looked at them. He was not a man who second-guessed himself. The mechanism for that had been removed very early in his career surgically, in the way that survival sometimes requires. But what he felt now was something adjacent to second-guessing. Not doubt about the decision exactly, more like an acute awareness of its weight, its permanence. The child sleeping down the hall, that was going to be a reality now. A daily reality. A reality with consequences he could not fully project. His phone rang. Min Seok, he picked up. I said noon. It's 11:58. A pause, precisely measured. There's a problem with the Incheon settlement. Kwan's people are saying the terms we agreed on aren't the terms they received. Someone altered the document. Jaemin's hand tightened slightly on the phone. Altered how? The revenue split. What we agreed was 60-40. What they have says 50-50. Their copy, our copy, different documents. A long silence. Who had access? That's what I'm trying to determine. Another careful pause. Boss, about the children. She stays. Final. No room. I'm not arguing that. Smooth. Too smooth. I'm saying that the timing of last night, the meeting, the witnesses, I need to know your thinking. My thinking is that she's 9 years old and she's alone and she stays. He kept his voice level. Now solve the Incheon problem. That's what I pay you for. He ended the call. He sat for another moment. Then he opened his desk drawer and took out a folder he'd been building for the last 3 months. A slow, quiet concern that he hadn't yet given a name. Discrepancies. Small ones. The kind that could be accounting errors, rounding differences, the natural friction of a large organization moving money through complex channels. He had almost convinced himself that's what they were. Almost. He put the folder back, closed the drawer, went to find something to eat. The kitchen smelled like rice and something frying. Nyla was sitting at the kitchen table in clean clothes, too large for her, probably borrowed from a staff member's child, with her wet hair pulled back and a bowl of rice in front of her that she was eating with deliberate focus. Mrs. Park was at the stove doing something complicated with a pan. Gaiman sat across from Nyla. She didn't look up. She was reading. She had found a newspaper somewhere, the morning edition, and had it open beside her bowl, and she was moving between the food and the text with an efficiency that suggested she did two things at once as a matter of habit. Can you read that? He said. The paper was in Korean, but the financial section had columns of English-language market data. The Korean parts, she turned a page. I'm learning the numbers sections. The patterns are easier than the words. He looked at her. How old did you say you were? Almost 10. She turned another page. Stopped. Went back. Read something again. Then she looked up at him with an expression that was difficult to parse. Something between suspicion and genuine curiosity. This company, she said. She pointed to a line in the financial listings. This one with the shipping subsidiary. They bought 4 other companies in the last 6 months, and all 4 were losing money. Why would you buy something that's losing money? Jaemin looked at the listing. He knew the company. He knew it better than he wanted to admit sitting at his kitchen table at noon talking to a 9-year-old. Because the loss is the point, he said. She looked at him. Sometimes you need a place to put money that no one asks about, he said. A business that's losing money doesn't attract the kind of attention that a business making money does. She looked back at the paper, looked at the listing for another moment. Then, that's illegal. Yes. You do this. A pause. Some version of it. She turned the page, read for a moment, then, without looking up, I'm going to learn how it works. All of it. Every part. She turned another page, so that someday I can take it apart. The kitchen was quiet. The pan on the stove made small sounds. Mrs. Park was either not listening or was very good at pretending. Gaiman looked at the top of the girl's head, bent over the newspaper, and felt something move in his chest that was entirely new and entirely inconvenient. You might not like what you find, he said. You already said that. She looked up, met his eyes. I already told you, I don't care. He almost smiled. Yes, you did. The months that followed had their own rhythm. Strange, asymmetric, the kind of rhythm that forms when two people with incompatible natures are forced into proximity and find, slowly, that the incompatibility is less structural than it first appeared. Nyla learned the house. She learned its geography, its routines, the unspoken rules of the staff, and the spoken rules that Jae-min laid down simply and without elaboration. Don't enter the study without knocking. Don't answer the door. Don't talk to anyone who comes to the house about anything that happens in the house. She followed these rules with a precision that impressed him and occasionally unsettled him. She did not follow them because she was obedient. She followed them because she had decided they were logical, which was different, and the distinction showed. She started school in March, after 3 weeks of bureaucratic maneuvering that cost Jae-min 2 favors and 1 significant cash payment to someone in the district education office who had expensive habits. No record of the group home. No record of day. A new document trail that began and ended in Jae-min's house in Seongbuk-dong, as if she had simply arrived there fully formed one winter morning and would remain. The school called in the second week. A teacher. Nyla had corrected the math instructor in front of the class. The teacher was wrong, the teacher acknowledged, but the manner had been, "Was she incorrect?" Jae-min said into the phone. "I'm sorry?" Was she incorrect when she corrected him? A pause. "No, but then teach her something harder." He ended the call. He told Nyla about it that evening. She was at the kitchen table with a textbook and didn't look up. He was wrong about the calculation. "I know. I didn't do it to embarrass him." "I know that too." She looked up. Something shifted in her face, a fractional softening, there and then gone. "You defended me." "You were right. That's not the same as defending me." She looked at him. "Most people don't do both." He said nothing. She looked back at her textbook, but something in the set of her shoulders had changed imperceptibly. The held quality, the permanent bracing against impact, had loosened half a degree. He noticed. He didn't say anything. He was learning that with her, the things you noticed but didn't name were often the most important ones. Min Seok came to the house less frequently now. He had never come often. Meetings were usually elsewhere, the kind of locations that didn't accumulate records. But in the months after Nyla arrived, the visits he did make had a different texture. He was polite to her. Professionally, precisely polite. He asked her about school. He commented on her intelligence with a particular brand of admiring flatness that Jae-min noticed, and Nyla, apparently, noticed differently. After one such visit, she was 11 now, 18 months into the house, sharper and stranger and more herself with each passing season. She came to Jae-min's study. She knocked. He said, "Come in." She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, which she did when she was working something out internally and needed the external frame. "Min Seok," she said. "What about him?" "Something's wrong with him." Jae-min set down the report he was reading. "Wrong how?" "I don't know yet." She was looking at a point slightly to the left of Jae-min's face, the way she looked when she was still processing. "The way he looks at you when you're not looking at him. It's not—" She stopped, started again. "It's not the way someone looks at a person they're loyal to. It's the way someone looks at a problem they haven't solved yet." Jae-min looked at her for a long moment. "Min Seok has been with me for 8 years. I know. He runs most of the organization's operations. Without him, I know what he does." She met his eyes. "I'm not saying I can prove it. I'm saying something is wrong, and I think you already know it, and you're choosing not to look at it." The silence in the study had a particular quality. Outside the garden, summer now, green and overgrown in the way Jae-min never had time to correct, made small sounds in the wind. "You're 11 years old," he said. "Almost 12. She didn't move from the doorway. "And you're not answering. I'm telling you that loyalty is built over time, over years, over things you can't see from the outside." He picked up the report again. "Min Seok has earned his position." She stood there for another moment. "So did every other person who eventually became someone's worst mistake," she said. Then she turned and left. Jae-min put the report down, stared at the desk, picked it up again. He did not open the folder in his drawer. Not that night. She was 15 when the first real fight happened. Not an argument. They had arguments constantly, quick, blunt exchanges that ended when one of them decided the point had been made and the other filed the outcome for future reference. This was different. This was the kind of confrontation that leaves marks. It started because of a man named Director Lim, a city official. The kind of official who appeared at functions and signed permits and had a name on documents that mattered to Jaimin's operation in ways that Nyla had, by 15, mapped with uncomfortable thoroughness. She had found something. She was always finding something, pulling at threads in financial records and legal filings with the single-minded persistence of someone who had decided very young that understanding was the only form of protection that held. And what she found was that Director Lim's signature had facilitated the displacement of 240 families from a housing block in Mapo to make way for a development that one of Jaimin's shell companies partially owned. She put the documents on his desk one evening without preamble. She stood and waited while he read them. When he finished, he looked up. "Where did you get these?" "The Municipal Records Office. They're public documents." A pause. "You just have to know what you're looking for." He looked at the documents again, then at her. "What do you want from me?" "Those families need to be compensated." It was a legal development. It was a legal development built on permits signed by a man you own that forced 240 families from housing they couldn't replace. Her voice was controlled, but there was something under it, a heat, a pressure, the first real evidence of what she had been storing up in the years of watching and learning. Some of those families had children. I checked. 41 children under 10 were moved from that building in December. He put the documents down. The city paid them the legal minimum relocation assistance, which is not enough, and you know it's not enough. She met his eyes. You know it because you built this operation on knowing exactly what enough looks like and always stopping one step short. The study was very quiet. Jaimin felt the truth of it, not as a revelation, but as a confirmation of something he had been keeping at distance. The particular discomfort of being accurately read by someone who loves you, which is a different kind of pain than being read by an enemy. "Nyla, I'm not asking you to be a different person." Her voice had gone flat. The heat compressed. "I'm asking you to make one decision that isn't purely about the number. One decision that admits those people are—" She stopped. Her jaw set. That they exist. That they're people. That what happened to them matters beyond what it cost the company. A long silence. "I'll look into the compensation," he said finally. "Don't look into it. Do it." He looked at her. She looked back. The air between them had the specific charge of two people who have reached the edge of something and are deciding whether to step back or push through. "You're 15, he said, quietly, without the dismissiveness it might have carried before. "I know exactly how old I am." She didn't move. "Do it, or don't, but know that I know which choice you made." She walked out. He sat in the study for an hour. Then he called Min Sok. "The Mapo relocation," he said. "The families from the Bukseong block. I want a supplemental compensation package. Full market replacement value. Arranged through the shell structure, untraceable to me, delivered within 60 days. A pause on the other end, carefully calibrated. "That's a significant sum, boss. The development already closed." 60 days. He ended the call. He didn't tell Nyla. He didn't need to. 3 months later, she came to him with a newspaper article, cites, a small one, inside the city section, about anonymous donations to families displaced by the Mapo development project. She set it on his desk without a word. He looked at it, looked at her. "You didn't have to do it anonymously," she said. "Yes, I did." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Because if you attached your name to it, people would ask questions about why I was compensating families I had no official connection to." She understood. He could see her absorbing the architecture of it, the way his world worked, the invisible scaffolding of legal distance that kept everything just barely untouchable, the way even a good act had to be hidden because of the structure that made it possible. She absorbed it with the particular expression she had developed for hard truths, not flinching, not performing acceptance, just taking the weight of it. "Someday," she said, "I'm going to learn how to not need all of that scaffolding." She picked up the newspaper article. "How to do something good in the open." "That's a long study," he said. "I know." She folded the article and put it in her pocket. "I'm not in a hurry." She wasn't. But time moved anyway, the way it always does. Indifferent to preparation, indifferent to readiness. She was 17 when she told him she wanted to study international law in the United States. She had already researched programs. She had already identified 3 universities. She set the information in front of him the way she had always set things in front of him, completely, precisely, without preamble. He looked at the documents, then at her face. She was watching him with the careful eyes she used when she expected resistance. Not the confrontational stillness of the fight about Director Lim, something more guarded, something that understood this was different. "When?" he said. "Next fall. I'll be 18 by then." "Who's paying?" "You are," without hesitation. "Unless you won't. In which case I find another way." She paused. "I wanted to ask you first." He looked at the university applications. Columbia, Georgetown, the London School of Economics, which was listed but crossed out in pencil with no explanation. He picked up the Columbia application. Read the personal statement she'd written, set it down. "You wrote about a city official and a housing project," he said. "I changed the names. You described the shell corporation structure in the third paragraph. It's illegal everywhere. I didn't name anyone." He looked at her. She met his gaze evenly, without apology. "It's good," he said. "The writing is good." Something moved in her face. Brief. "I know." Then, "Will you fund it?" "Yes." He didn't hesitate. "All of it. Whatever it costs." He set the papers down. "On one condition." She waited. "You come back," he said. He said it simply, without weight, without the particular kind of need that would have made it a different kind of sentence. Just a statement of what he needed. "When you're done, you come back." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not abandoning you," she said. "I know that. But I need you to understand." She stopped, started over. "What I'm going to study, what I'm going to learn. I'm not learning it to help you run this operation." She gestured slightly, at the study, at the house, at the whole invisible structure it represented. "I'm learning it to end it." The study was very quiet. Outside the garden in late November, brown and waiting for the first freeze, the city beyond the wall, grinding on. "I know that too," Jamin said. She nodded. Something passed between them. Not agreement exactly, something more complicated. An acknowledgement. A mutual recognition of what they were to each other and what they were not, and what the difference between those things cost. She left for New York in September. No airport ceremony, no extended goodbye. She came to the study the night before and stood in the doorway the way she had always stood in that doorway, arms slightly crossed, reading the room, reading him. "I'll call," she said. "You don't have to." "I know." She looked at him. "I will anyway." He nodded. She turned to go. At the door, she stopped, not looking back. "Jamin." It was the first time she had used his name directly to his face since he had offered it to her in the car 8 years ago. "What?" A pause. "Watch Min Seok," she said. "While I'm gone. Watch him carefully." She left before he could answer. He sat in the study until the house was quiet. Then he opened the drawer. He took out the folder. He spread the contents on the desk and read through them carefully, all of them. The way you read something when you finally allow yourself to accept what it says. The discrepancies were not errors. He had known that for a long time. Known it and filed it, and built the reasons why it couldn't be what it looked like. Because Min Seok was his right hand. Because Min Seok had been there since the beginning. Because some kinds of loyalty you don't question without questioning the entire architecture of your own judgment. But the numbers were the numbers. And the girl, the woman now, technically, though in his mind she was still standing barefoot in a hospital corridor at 9 years old, telling him she didn't want his money, the woman had been right from the beginning, at 11 years old, standing in the doorway saying something is wrong. He sat with the folder for a long time. Then he closed it, put it back in the drawer. He did not confront Min Seok. Not that night, not yet. Because Jaemin was a man who understood that timing was everything. That the difference between a problem solved and a problem survived was knowing exactly when to move. He didn't know it yet, but he had already waited too long. 3 weeks after Nyla's flight disappeared into the New York sky, a prosecutor's office in Central Seoul received an anonymous package containing the first installment of financial records, carefully curated, meticulously organized, devastatingly accurate, documenting 18 years of criminal enterprise bearing the name and signature of one man. Jiamin Huang. The package had no return address. The financial records were real. The signatures were real. The shell corporations, the laundered funds, the falsified permits, all of it was real, documented and verifiable and assembled with the precision of someone who had spent years building a case. The only thing that was false, invisibly, unfindably false, was who the records said had ordered it all. The prosecutor's name was Han Dong-wook, and he had been waiting 12 years for something like this. He was 51, thin in the way of men who forget to eat, with the particular patience of someone who had built a career on cases that took longer than careers. He had tried twice before to assemble a viable case against Jiamin Huang, once in his 30s when he was aggressive and made mistakes, once in his 40s when he was careful and the witnesses disappeared. He had learned from both. He had learned to wait. He had learned that the most dangerous criminals were not brought down by courage or brilliance, but by the one thing you couldn't manufacture, the moment when someone on the inside decided they were done. He opened the package on a Tuesday morning with his office door closed and his assistant told to hold everything. He read for 4 hours without stopping. Then he called 2 colleagues and told them to clear their calendars. By Thursday, a formal investigation had been opened. By the following Monday, it had been classified and sealed at a level that kept it out of any newspaper for exactly 19 more days. Jamin learned about it the way he learned about most threats. Not from an official source, not from a legal notice, but from a phone call at 6 in the morning from a man whose name he would not say aloud and whose number was not stored in any device. The man said 4 words, "Han Dong-wook has something." Then the line went dead. Jamin sat on the edge of his bed in the dark house in Seongbuk-dong and held the phone in his hand and breathed, slowly. The way he had trained himself to breathe when the ground shifted, not faster, slower, pulling the air all the way down, using the physical act of breathing as a mechanism for keeping the mind from doing what minds do when they're afraid, which was panic, which was the one thing he could not afford. He called Min-suk at 6:03. "I need to know what Han Dong-wook has," he said. A pause on the other end. "When did you hear?" "Just now. What do you know?" "I've been monitoring his office for 3 weeks. Min-suk's voice was precise, controlled, the voice of a man delivering a report. "He received something in the mail. A package. Financial records, from what I can determine. I don't yet know the full scope. 3 weeks. Jamin's voice had gone very quiet. "You've known for 3 weeks. "I was assessing the threat level before 3 weeks, Min-suk." He said the name the way you say something when you are deciding what it means. "And you're telling me now because I called you." A beat, carefully measured. "I didn't want to alarm you prematurely. The investigation was sealed. Get to my house. Now." He ended the call. He stood. He walked to the window and looked out at the garden in the early morning dark, the bare-bone November landscape, and he ran the calculation the way he had run 1,000 calculations before, assessing variables, mapping exposure, looking for the point of control. But this calculation felt different. It felt like a calculation someone else had already run, from the inside with better information. Min-seok arrived in 40 minutes. He sat across from Jae-min in the study with his hands on his knees and delivered his report in the methodical way he always delivered reports. Structured, sequential, covering each element before moving to the next. The package contained 18 years of financial records, shell corporation documentation, permit approvals, laundering architecture, detailed enough to establish criminal enterprise, broad enough to establish pattern, precise enough that it could only have come from someone with access to the internal structure of the organization. "What's the sourcing?" Jamin said. "Who sent it?" "Anonymous. No forensic trail on the package itself. Internal access. Someone inside the organization." "That's the most likely assessment." Min-suk looked at him steadily. "I have a list of individuals with the relevant access level. I can start." "The signatures on those records," Jamin said. "What names are on them?" A pause. "Yours." "Mine." "Every order, every authorization, every shell company registration." Min-suk's voice didn't change. "Your signature, your name. The entire 18 years of records reads as a single unbroken chain of command originating with you." Jamin looked at him. "And the people who actually signed some of those authorizations?" I don't know what the records contain specifically. Yes, you do. Jamin said it without heat, just with the particular flatness of a man who has stopped managing his own reaction. You just told me you've been monitoring this for 3 weeks. You know exactly what those records contain. He looked at Min Seok's face, the composed, professional, precisely calibrated face that had sat across from him in this study for 8 years. And for the first time, he looked at it without the accumulated weight of loyalty distorting the view. He looked at it the way Nyla had looked at it at 11 years old. You have access to everything, he said quietly. Every record, every signature file, every corporate document. You've had it for 8 years. Min Seok held his gaze. Yes. How long? Jamin said. How long have you been building it? The study was very quiet. Outside, the first gray light of morning was beginning to define the shapes in the garden. Somewhere in the house, a heating pipe clicked. Min Seok did not answer, which was itself an answer. Jamin had spent his adult life reading silences. He had built an empire partly on the ability to hear what people were not saying, to understand the meaning behind pauses, to decode the architecture of controlled expression. He had never had cause to apply that skill to Min Seok. He applied it now. He read the silence, and what he read sat in his chest like cold iron. Get out of my house, he said. Boss? Get out. The voice still quiet, still level, the dangerous kind of level that had nothing to do with calm. Right now. Before I make a decision I can't walk back from. Min Seok stood. His expression had not changed. That was the most telling thing, that it had not changed at all, that there was no guilt, no fear, no crack in the professional surface. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Jamin one more time with those calculating eyes that Jamin now understood had always been calculating. Had been calculating since the beginning, since whatever moment 8 years ago or 10 years ago or further back than that, when Min Seok had looked at everything Jamin built and decided it was worth more as leverage than as loyalty. You should know, Min Seok said at the door without turning, that the investigation already has enough. Enough for an arrest. Possibly enough for a conviction. A pause. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand the situation clearly. Get out. He left. His footsteps crossed the entrance hall. The front door opened and closed with a quiet, expensive sound. The car on the gravel. The gate. Silence. Jamin sat in the study and did not move for a long time. Then he opened the drawer. He took out the folder. He spread everything on the desk and looked at it again with new eyes. With the eyes of a man who now knew what he was looking at, and the pattern that had looked like accounting irregularities assembled itself into something else entirely. Not errors. Architecture. A structure built over years with the patience and precision of someone who understood every system they were dismantling because they had helped build it. Shell companies he didn't recognize. Transfers he hadn't authorized. Forged signatures, his signature, reproduced with the fidelity that came from years of handling his documents, on authorizations for operations he had never ordered, and beneath all of it, layered in, woven through the legitimate records of 18 years of criminal enterprise, a parallel narrative, a manufactured history in which Jamin Huang had not only done what he had actually done, but had done everything, had ordered the things Min Seok ordered, had signed the things Min Seok signed, had built a structure of criminality so total and so documented that the real truth, that 2 men had run this organization, that one of them had spent years quietly loading the gun and aiming it at the other, was invisible. He closed the folder, put it back, locked the drawer. He called his lawyer. It was 6:45 in the morning, and the lawyer answered on the second ring, which meant he had already heard. I need to know exactly what they have, Jamin said. Specifically, whatever you can access. Jamin, the lawyer's voice had the texture of a man managing bad news. It's significant. I've been told the volume of documentation is, can it be challenged? A pause. Anything can be challenged, but this? Another pause. This reads as if it was assembled by someone who knew every defense you'd mount, every gap you'd look for, every witness you'd call. He stopped. It's as if someone spent years preparing specifically against your defense, not against a generic prosecution. Because they did, Jamin said. Get me an appointment, wherever you need to, Whoever you need to talk to." He ended the call. He sat for a moment. Then he took out his phone and found the contact he had not called in 3 months. An American number, New York area code. The kind of call he had told himself he would not make because she deserved the distance, deserved the separation from this world she had gone across an ocean to study her way out of. He looked at the contact, put the phone face down on the desk. He did not call her. The arrest came 6 weeks later. They did it correctly. Not at the house, not in a way designed to humiliate, because Han Dong-wook was a man who understood that spectacle was for prosecutors who needed the press more than they needed convictions. He sent 2 officers to the law firm where Jae-min had a scheduled meeting, and they were quiet about it. And Jae-min went without incident because he had known it was coming and had decided that the manner of it mattered. He was processed. He was held. His lawyer filed the paperwork, and Jae-min was released on bail within 14 hours because he was a 50-year-old man with no flight history and a lawyer who had spent 30 years being very good at the specific intersection of criminal law and strategic timing. He went home. He sat in the study. The house felt different now, larger somehow, or maybe just emptier. Mrs. Park brought tea. He didn't drink it. The newspapers had it by morning. He saw the headline on his phone at 6 a.m., 2 days after the arrest, sent by his lawyer with no additional comment because none was needed. The headline was not subtle. The photograph was one from a charity event 3 years ago. Jae-min in a good suit, looking precisely like what he was, which the camera had apparently decided was sufficient evidence of guilt. The story was detailed and sourced and contained information that had not been made public, which meant someone was feeding it. The story contained one detail that hit differently than the others. It mentioned his daughter. Not by name, she was referenced as an unnamed family member, a ward he had taken in as a child, who had reportedly cut contact with him after leaving for overseas study. The implication was clinical and deliberate, that even those closest to him had eventually understood what he was and chosen to leave. He set the phone down, picked it up, set it down again. It was the most precise piece of the architecture. He understood that immediately. Min Seok had always known that Nyla was the one variable that could not be controlled by documents or money or legal maneuver. She was the one thing that had a different weight, and so he had made her absence into evidence, had let the press turn her departure into narrative. The story of a criminal so irredeemable that even the daughter who had once defended him had ultimately abandoned him. Jae-min sat with that for a long time. He did not call her. He had decided, in the early hours after the arrest, that he would not call her. He had examined the decision from every angle. The pragmatic angle, the legal angle, the angle that had nothing to do with strategy. And the conclusion was always the same. She was overseas. She was building a life in law, building a career that would be destroyed by visible association with a man currently facing criminal conspiracy charges. She had left to get away from this. The most honest thing he could do was let the distance stand. He believed this completely. He was also completely wrong. The legal proceedings moved with a momentum that the lawyer characterized carefully as challenging. The documentation was extraordinary. That was the word he used, extraordinary, with the tone of a man trying to be professional about something that was alarming him. The forensic accounting alone constituted over 4,000 pages. The Shell Corporation trail extended across 7 countries. The forged signatures had been authenticated by 3 independent experts, all of whom reached the same conclusion. These were real signatures, signed by Jae-min Hwang, on documents authorizing criminal activity. The forgeries were perfect. The lawyer said this without fully believing what he was saying. Perfect in a way that forensic analysis at the available level could not distinguish from genuine. That to challenge them effectively would require an equally extraordinary counter-analysis, the kind that cost significant resources and even then offered no guarantee. What you need, the lawyer said, in the 3rd week of preparation, sitting across from Jae-min in a conference room that smelled of cold coffee and dread, is evidence of the actual source. Evidence of who built this. The chain of construction. Not just arguing that the documents are false, demonstrating where they came from and who assembled them and for what purpose. He paused. That evidence would have to be international in scope. The shell companies cross 4 jurisdictions. The financial trail, the real financial trail, the one showing who actually controlled these accounts, would require access to banking records in Cayman, Luxembourg, Singapore, and Hong Kong, none of which will cooperate with a Korean prosecution defense without a specific legal mechanism. He looked at Jae-min. Do you have anyone who can do that? Jae-min thought about a girl who had been 9 years old and had looked at a financial listing in a newspaper and asked why you would buy something that was losing money, who had at 11 told him that something was wrong with Min Seok, and then spent the next 7 years studying every mechanism by which the thing that was wrong could be proven, who had gone to New York to study international law, not because she was running away from this world, but because she was preparing for it. I might, he said. Get them, the lawyer said. The media coverage escalated in the second month. There was a segment on a major network, the kind of segment that appears when a story has been carefully cultivated, the sources given just enough of the right information to build a particular narrative. The segment included interviews with 3 anonymous sources who described Jae-min's organization in detail, described his methods, described the particular architecture of violence and financial manipulation that had sustained it for 18 years. All accurate, all things that Jae-min had actually done or ordered. None of the detail was fabricated. The only fabrication was the attribution. The claim that it had been directed entirely, solely from the top, that Min Seok had been a functionary, an instrument, a loyal lieutenant following orders. The claim that Nyla's departure was a daughter's final rejection of a father she had discovered was beyond redemption. That detail was picked up and repeated. It ran in the caption beneath the charity photo. It was referenced in the next 5 stories. It became, in the way that certain details become in media narratives, a settled fact. The emotional center of the story, the element that made Jae-min Hwang not just a criminal, but a specific kind of criminal, the kind who corrupted even the people who loved him. Min Seok gave one interview. He gave it carefully, through a lawyer, in a format that allowed him to decline specific questions while establishing the general shape of his narrative. A loyal subordinate who had executed orders he was not always comfortable with, who had cooperated with the investigation because he believed in the rule of law, who deeply regretted the harm caused and hoped that justice would be served. He did not mention Nyla by name. He did not need to. The implication was already in the public conversation. Jae-min watched the interview from the study in Seongbuk-dong. He watched it the way you watch something that confirms what you already knew. Not with surprise, not with fresh outrage, just with the particular cold attention of a man updating his understanding of a situation that is worse than even his worst prior estimate. He turned the television off. He sat in the study with his hands on his knees and looked at the desk where the empty drawer was. The folder long since delivered to his lawyer as evidence, thin and insufficient against the wall of documentation that Min Seok had built over years, with the patience of someone who had never stopped believing that the long game was the only game worth playing. He thought about Nyla, about the night she left, about the things she had said in the doorway. Watch Min Seok while I'm gone. Watch him carefully. And the thing he had done instead, which was to open the drawer and read the folder and then close it again and tell himself that timing was everything, that he would know when to move. He had waited too long. He had been so certain that his ability to read situations was his most reliable tool, had trusted it so completely that he had read the situation correctly and then hesitated anyway, had let the loyalty, the 8 years, the accumulated evidence of competence and reliability override what the numbers were telling him, what a 9-year-old girl had seen at 11 years old, what his own instinct had been whispering since before the folder existed. And now Min Seok was on television, looking carefully regretful, and Jae-min was in his study facing the most serious criminal charges in the country, with documentation so complete it had already convinced most of his organization to quietly reposition their loyalties, and the court date was 11 weeks away. The call came on a Thursday evening. Unknown number. International. He picked up. I know, she said. No preamble, no greeting, just 2 words that carried the full weight of someone who had been watching and waiting and deciding when to speak. Her voice was different. Not older exactly, more set, like something that had been under pressure long enough to become dense. Nyla. He said her name the way you say something you've been carrying. How long have you known? Long enough? A pause. I've been tracking the financial records for 3 years, the international ones, The shell companies in Luxembourg and Singapore. I found the construction point, the place where Min Seok's trail diverges from yours. Her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it. Not anger, something colder. Something that had moved past anger into the territory of pure purpose. I have evidence. Not enough yet. But the architecture. I know where the rest of it is. Nyla, don't what? The coldness sharpened. Don't come back. Don't get involved. Don't do what I've been preparing to do for 3 years. A pause, briefer than the others, the kind that contains a decision. I watched you give everything you had to building something. I watched Min Seok stand next to you for 8 years and smile and wait and build something else entirely. And then I watched the press tell the story of a daughter who abandoned her criminal father, which is not what happened, and I want you to understand something clearly. Her voice had gone very quiet, the kind of quiet that in Jaemin's experience presaged the most serious statements. I left to prepare. I never left. He sat with that for a moment. The heating pipe clicked in the wall. Outside the city. The court date is 11 weeks out, he said. I know. I've read everything filed so far. A brief pause. The defense strategy your lawyer is building won't work. He's trying to argue inconsistencies in the documents. That won't survive the prosecution's experts. What he needs is the counter-narrative, the source chain, the proof of construction. Another pause. I have 2 more weeks of work to finish, maybe 3. Then I'm coming home. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The case against me is, I know what the case against you is. She cut him off cleanly, not rudely, just with the efficiency of someone who has no time for incomplete sentences. I also know something that your lawyer and Han Dong-wook and Min Seok and every journalist covering this story doesn't know. A pause. The kind that held something. Min Seok made one mistake. One. In 15 years of building this, he made one mistake, and I found it. Her voice was still quiet, but something in it had shifted. Something that was almost in a different context, satisfaction. The satisfaction of a calculation that had finally resolved. 3 years ago, when he moved a specific set of funds through a Singapore subsidiary, he used a routing structure that he had used once before, 9 years ago, in a different context. A structure that only 2 people in the world knew about, you and him, because you built it together. A pause. The records from 9 years ago still exist, in an archive in Luxembourg that requires an international legal mechanism to access, which I have been quietly assembling the standing to invoke for 18 months. She paused. When I pull those records, they will show that the routing structure was Min Seok's invention, his personal architecture, registered to an entity that has his name on it in a jurisdiction where you never operated. A longer pause. That chain breaks the document attribution in 3 places. It won't clear everything, but it will shift enough of the case to give your lawyer room to work. Jaemin sat very still. The room around him, the desk, the empty drawer, the walls of documents that represented 38 years of a life built on the certainty that he could manage every situation through intelligence and timing and the careful application of force, was very quiet. You've been building this for 3 years, he said, since the first discrepancy I found in the Luxembourg filings. She said it without drama. I didn't tell you because I didn't have enough yet, and because... She stopped. Something in her voice shifted fractionally. Because I needed you to not do anything. Not move against him, not tip him off, not... Another stop. Quieter. I needed you to wait. I know that wasn't fair. I know what it cost. He didn't say anything. Jaemin. His name. Direct. The way she had said it once before, in a doorway, leaving. I need you to do one thing. What? Don't give up, she said. The prosecution is going to push hard in the next 2 weeks. They're going to put maximum pressure on your organization, on your remaining allies, your financial holdings, your legal standing, trying to get someone to flip before trial. They're going to run more press about me, about the daughter who left. Her voice was steady. Let them. Don't answer it. Don't defend yourself publicly. Don't do anything. A pause. Just hold. He breathed, slowly, all the way down. For how long? He said. Until I walk through that door, she said. The line went quiet. Not dead. He could hear her breathing on the other end, across 8,000 kilometers of cable and satellite and ocean, the sound of someone who had made a decision and was standing inside it. "Nyla," he said. "What?" He didn't answer immediately. He sat in the study in the dark house with the dead garden outside and the city beyond it and the legal proceedings closing in from every direction, and he thought about a bridge in winter and a girl who refused his money and a boy who liked fire trucks and would never grow up, and about 8 years of a house that had been too large for one person and was then exactly the right size, and about a folder in a drawer that he had opened too late, and about the most dangerous thing he had ever done, which was not any of the 38 years of criminal decisions but a single moment under a bridge when he had held out his hand. "Come home," he said. The line held for one more moment. Then, "I'm already on my way." She landed at Incheon on a Tuesday morning with a carry-on bag and a leather document folder that she did not let go of at customs, not at baggage claim, not in the back of the cab that took her directly from the airport to the law offices of Kim and Associates in Seocho-gu, where Jae-min's lawyer had been told to expect her. The lawyer's name was Kim Tae-sung. He was 60, silver-haired, with the particular weariness of a man who had spent 4 decades at the intersection of law and organized crime and had stopped being surprised by either. He had been told Nyla Rowan was 26 years old, Columbia law, 2 years clerking for an international arbitration chamber in New York, currently working in international financial litigation. He had been told she was Jae-min's ward. He had expected someone impressive. She walked into his conference room and set the leather folder on the table and opened it before sitting down, and he understood within 4 minutes that impressive was not the right word. "The prosecution's case has 3 load-bearing pillars," she said. She was standing, not sitting, and she was not looking at him. She was looking at the documents she had spread across the table with the focused intensity of someone who had been staring at these materials for 3 years and had the architecture memorized but needed the physical presence of them to talk through it. First pillar, signature authentication. They have 3 independent forensic experts confirming the signatures on the authorization documents are genuine. We can't fight that directly. The forgeries are too good for current forensic methodology to distinguish at the level we'd need. She moved 2 documents aside. Second pillar, shell corporation chain. 14 entities across 7 jurisdictions, all traceable to Jae-min through nominee structures and historical registration documents. She tapped 1 page. Third pillar, financial flow. 22 years of money movement documented and sourced, showing a consistent pattern of laundering through entities attributed to him. She looked up. The prosecution believes these 3 pillars are mutually reinforcing, that if anyone holds, the case holds. She paused. They're wrong, because all 3 pillars share a single foundation, and the foundation is false. Kim Tae-sung looked at the documents, at her face, at the documents again. What foundation? The routing architecture. She pulled a specific set of papers from the folder, printed banking records, annotated in handwriting so dense it covered the margins. Every shell corporation in this chain uses a specific fund movement structure, a particular sequence of inter-entity transfers designed to obscure beneficial ownership. It's not a standard structure. It's custom-built. Bespoke. She set the papers in front of him. This structure was first used 9 years ago in a Singapore subsidiary. I found the original registration documents in a Luxembourg archive that required an international legal mechanism to access. I have standing through the arbitration chamber, which I used. She paused. The structure is registered to an entity called Meridian Consulting Partners, a nominee entity. But Meridian has a director of record, 1 director, not Jae-min. She let that sit for a second. Min Seok's name, in his own handwriting, on a document filed in 2016 that the prosecution has never seen because they didn't know to look for it, and because Min Seok very carefully avoided letting any of his own records enter any jurisdiction he thought was being monitored. Kim Tae-sung was very still. This document proves he controlled the structure. It proves he built it. It proves he registered it. And when I cross-reference it against the shell corporation chain in the prosecution's evidence, when I show that every single entity in that chain uses a routing structure invented and registered by Min Seok, The prosecution's narrative that Jae-min was the architect collapses. She looked at him directly. It doesn't clear him of everything. He ran a criminal organization. That's real and it's documented, and it's not what we're fighting. What we're fighting is the fabricated layer, the forged authorization documents, the manufactured evidence that turns a criminal into a monster. She paused. We can win this, but we need to move fast. The trial is in 9 days, and I need access to the prosecution's full evidence disclosure. I need 3 forensic accountants who can work around the clock, and I need someone to file an emergency request for the Luxembourg documents to be admitted as international evidence under the Hague Convention framework by end of week. Ma'am? Idol. Kim Tae-sung looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and started making calls. Jae-min was at the house when she arrived. He heard the car on the gravel, and he stood up from the study desk and walked to the entrance hall, and was standing there when the door opened. She looked different, not older. The word wasn't right. More resolved, like someone who had been in a process for a long time, and the process was finally at its end phase, and the body knew it. She was in a dark coat, her hair shorter than he remembered, the amber eyes the same, still reading, still calculating, still doing the enormous amount of work behind a still exterior. She looked at him. He looked at her. 8 years of distance compressed into a moment that had no adequate language. You look terrible, she said. You look tired, he said. She stepped inside. She looked at the entrance hall, the house she had grown up in, the proportions and smells of it, the specific way the light came through the window above the door in the morning. Something passed across her face, brief and private. Then it was gone, and she was moving, coat still on, toward the study. All soon. Tell me everything they've done to your organization in the last 6 weeks, she said over her shoulder. Every ally who's repositioned, every asset they've frozen, every... Nyla. He said it to her back. She stopped, turned. He looked at her from the entrance hall. He was 50 years old, and he had spent his life not saying things, not naming things, operating in the register of implication and managed silence, and the specific economy of a man who had learned that words were mostly ways to expose yourself. He stood there for a moment, and he let that habit fight with something else. I should have called you, he said. When it started, I should have... You were protecting me. Flat, not absolution, just identification. I know. It was wrong. You should have called me. She met his eyes. But I already knew. I was already working, so it didn't cost us what it would have otherwise. She held his gaze for one more second. We can talk about it after. Right now, I need the information. She turned and went into the study. He followed. They worked through the night. The next 9 days had a quality of compression that Jae-min had only experienced twice before in his life, both times in situations where survival was being decided hour by hour and there was no space between the decisions. Just a continuous forward motion that either ended with you still standing or didn't. The legal team worked in rotating shifts in Kim Tae-sung's conference room. Nyla worked all shifts. She slept 4 hours a night on a cot in the building's storage room, set an alarm, woke up, and went back to the documents. She ate standing at the conference table. She argued with forensic accountants, with legal clerks, with Kim Tae-sung himself on 2 occasions when his read of the risk differed from hers, and she argued without deference and without apology, and with the kind of precise, evidence-based aggression that made 2 of the senior associates visibly uncomfortable and made Kim Tae-sung, after the second argument, quietly tell his assistant that she was right and adjust the strategy accordingly. The Luxembourg documents came through on day 6. Emergency Hague Convention filing, 22 pages, certified and authenticated. Neela read them the moment they arrived and then sat for 3 minutes without moving, which was the longest she had been still in 6 days. And then she looked up and said, "We have it." And the room understood from her voice that this meant something definitive. Jae-min was not in the conference room. He had been in the conference room for the first 4 days, and then Nyla had told him, with the particular directness she used for decisions that were not up for discussion, that his presence was counterproductive, that the team needed to work without the weight of his physical presence in the room, without the dynamic of performing for the man whose life was being debated. He had understood the logic. He had gone back to the house and spent the remaining days doing what she had told him to do on the phone from New York, holding. It was the hardest thing he had done in 50 years, harder than any confrontation, harder than any decision made under threat or time pressure or the immediate physical weight of danger. Holding meant sitting in the study while his organization continued its quiet dissolution. 2 more senior members formally distancing themselves in public statements, 3 financial accounts frozen by court order, the media running a new story every 48 hours, each one adding another layer to the portrait of a man who had destroyed everything he touched. The story about Nyla ran on day 7, a full segment. A journalist who had clearly been given access to specific information described the ward's history. The orphan taken in off the streets, raised in the household of a criminal, given an education funded by crime money, who had ultimately left for America and severed all contact. The segment ended with a question posed rhetorically to the camera. What does it tell us about a man when even the child he claimed to save eventually decided he was beyond saving? Jamin turned the television off. He sat in the dark study. He did not call anyone. He did not issue a statement. He held. The morning of the trial, Nyla came to the house at 6 a.m. She was in a dark suit that she had bought 3 days ago and not worn since. She had the leather folder. She looked like she had slept, which meant she had probably slept 5 hours instead of 4. She found him in the kitchen. Eat something, she said. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway. She sat across from him. Mrs. Park, who had wept quietly when Nyla walked back into the house 9 days ago and had not mentioned it since, put food in front of both of them. Nyla ate. Jamin did not. She looked at him across the table. Are you ready? She said. For what? To do this differently. She set her chopsticks down. Whatever happens in that courtroom today, and I believe we can win this, I believe the evidence gives us a real case. But whatever happens, what comes after is different. I need to know you understand that. She looked at him directly. If we walk out of there today, the organization is done. The criminal operation, all of it. That's not negotiable. That's not something I'm asking. That's what happens. She paused. And I need to know you're not going to fight me on it. He looked at her. This woman who had been a 9-year-old girl in plastic bag shoes telling him his money was worthless. Who had sat in this kitchen with a newspaper at 10 years old and identified the mechanism of his criminality within 4 minutes. Who had spent 8 years preparing for a battle that no one had asked her to prepare for and that she had prepared for anyway, because she had decided, somewhere in the middle of a hospital corridor with a bowl of ramen, that he was worth it. I'm not going to fight you on it, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. She picked up her chopsticks. They ate in silence, the particular silence of 2 people who have said what needed to be said and are now inside the decision. The Seoul Central District Court was the kind of building that had been designed to communicate the weight of the state. Gray stone, high ceilings, the specific institutional smell of documents and polished floors, and decades of decisions that had changed people's lives. The gallery was full. Press. The case had been covered extensively enough that there were people who had queued for public gallery seats, which happened perhaps twice a decade for any trial in this building. Jamin walked in with Kim Tae-sung on his left and 2 associates behind. He walked the way he had always walked, without hurry, without visible weight, the body language of a man who had decided long ago that how you carried yourself in a room was itself a kind of argument. He sat at the defense table. He looked at the prosecution across the room, Han Dong-wook, who looked back at him with the patient, settled expression of a man who believed he had already won and was here for the confirmation. Min Seok was in the gallery, not at the prosecution table. He was technically a cooperative witness, not a co-defendant, which was the specific legal architecture of his deal with the prosecution. He sat in the second row in a dark suit with his hands folded in his lap and his face arranged in the expression of careful, regretful professionalism that Jae-min had seen on television. He did not look at Jae-min, which was deliberate, which told Jae-min everything about how confident he was. The proceedings began. Opening statements. The prosecution's opening was 40 minutes, and it was good. Organized, evidence-heavy, emotionally calibrated to the jury's sense of public harm without being manipulative. Han Dong-wook was a 51-year-old man who had spent his career building exactly this kind of case, and he knew how to deliver it. The gallery was silent throughout. Kim Tae-sung delivered the defense opening. 12 minutes. Conservative. establishing reasonable doubt as a framework without committing to the counter-narrative yet. Nyla's instruction, preserving the element of surprise in the evidence presentation for maximum impact. In the gallery, a journalist was already typing. In the second row, Min Seok's hand stayed folded in his lap. The first prosecution witness took the stand at 11:15, a forensic accounting expert. He was thorough and credentialed and devastating. 3 hours of testimony establishing the financial architecture of the case, the shell corporations, the fund movements, the documented pattern of 18 years. Kim Tae-sung's cross-examination was measured. He planted seeds rather than pulling threads. A question here, a clarification there, setting up the ground for what was coming without revealing it. The second day began with the signature authentication expert. He testified for 2 hours. The signatures were genuine, all of them. 3 independent analyses, same conclusion. The gallery absorbed this with the particular quality of collective certainty forming, the feeling in a room when a fact has been established well enough that it no longer feels like assertion. During the lunch recess on the second day, Jae-min sat in a small room off the main corridor with Nyla and Kim Tae-sung. Nyla was reading. She had been reading since they sat down. Not the current materials, something else, a document she'd received that morning that she was working through with the fine detail focus she brought to everything. The Luxembourg authentication came back this morning, she said without looking up. Full certification. It'll hold. She turned a page. We present it tomorrow with the forensic accountant rebuttal. The sequence matters. Ace, accounting first, establishing the routing structure as the evidentiary foundation, then the Luxembourg document proving attribution. She looked up. Once the routing structure is traced back to Min Seok's registered entity, the signature authentication becomes irrelevant. The question isn't whether those are Jae-min's signatures. The question is whether the documents those signatures appear on were ever legitimate orders or were manufactured to receive genuine-looking signatures. She paused, and the answer to that question is in the routing structure, which is Min Seok's. Kim Tae-sung nodded slowly. And Min Seok's testimony. He testifies day 4. We cross-examine him after the routing evidence is already in the record. Something in her voice had gone sharp. Not angry, focused. The sharpness of someone who has been planning a specific moment for a long time and can feel it approaching. By the time he takes that stand, the jury will have seen the Luxembourg document. They'll have heard the forensic accountant establish the routing structure attribution. When I cross-examine him, she stopped. Set the document down. He'll have 2 choices. Maintain the lie in the face of the evidence, which destroys his credibility, or break. She looked at Jae-min. Either way, the case against you fractures. Jae-min had been listening with his hands flat on the table and his face giving nothing. He looked at her now. And if he breaks, then we get the truth on the record. She met his eyes, which is what this is for. The third day went the way Nyla had mapped it. The defense forensic accountant was on the stand for 4 hours. He was 63, internationally credentialed, the kind of expert whose delivery had the quiet certainty of someone who had testified in 14 countries and had stopped being interested in anything except whether the numbers were correct. He walked the jury through the routing structure with the patience of a man explaining something genuinely complicated to people who needed to understand it, and he was good enough at it that by the time he finished, 3 jurors were leaning slightly forward in their seats. The Luxembourg document was admitted at 3:45 in the afternoon under the Hague Convention framework. Han Dong-wook objected on evidentiary grounds. The objection was overruled. The document was displayed on the court screens. Meridian Consulting Partners. Director of Record. Min Seok's name. His handwriting. 2016. A jurisdiction Min Seok had used exactly once, apparently certain it would never be found, because the international legal mechanism required to access it was obscure enough that only someone specifically trained in international arbitration practice would know it existed. In the second row of the gallery, Min Seok's hands unfolded. He looked at the screen. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Nyla, who was sitting at the defense table with the leather folder in front of her, and for the first time since the proceedings began, he showed something on his face. It was not guilt. It was not regret. It was the expression of a man who had built something over 15 years and was watching the foundation come apart and was recalculating very rapidly in the way that a certain kind of intelligence always recalculates. looking for the next position, the next move, the next angle that preserved the maximum amount of what remained. Nyla looked back at him. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she turned back to the documents in front of her. That evening, the prosecution's legal team filed an emergency motion requesting a 24-hour recess to review the Luxembourg evidence. The motion was granted. The court would reconvene in the morning. Jamin was standing in the corridor outside the courtroom when Min Seok appeared. He came from the gallery exit, moving with the deliberate, unhurried pace of someone who had decided to do something and was committed to the commitment. 2 of the court officers at the corridor's end were occupied with a press situation near the main doors. There was a window of perhaps 90 seconds in which the corridor held only the 2 of them. Min Seok stopped 4 feet away. "You found the Luxembourg entity," he said. His voice was its usual precise register, controlled, professional, devoid of the performance of emotion, just a man acknowledging a fact. Jamin looked at him. He felt everything in his body, not just the anger, which was there, but underneath it something more structural. The specific weight of 8 years of misplaced trust, the cost of that trust, the particular damage of having been read correctly by a child and having chosen loyalty over clarity anyway. "She found it," he said. "Clever girl," said with what might have been genuine admiration, which was the most terrible thing about it. "Walk away, Min Seok. It won't be enough." Min Seok's voice didn't change. The Luxembourg document establishes the routing architecture. It creates reasonable doubt. It won't clear you of the underlying enterprise. Han Dong-wook will redirect. He has enough on the base criminal activity to... I know what he has. Then you know that even if the fabricated layer is exposed, you're still facing Min Seok. Jae-min said it the way he ended things, with the full weight of 30 years of knowing exactly what his voice could communicate without raising it. "I know what you're doing. You're managing. You're looking for the angle. It's what you do. It's what you've always done." He looked at him. There is no angle left. Something moved in Min Seok's face. The first real movement, brief, and then controlled back into the professional surface. 8 years, he said, quietly. "I ran your organization for 8 years. I kept it functioning. I kept it profitable. I kept you clear of prosecution through 7 separate investigations. I did that." "Yes," Jamin said, "and you were going to give it to her." The control slipped a fraction, just a fraction. "A child you found under a bridge. You were going to hand her the entire structure and let her dismantle it," Jamin said. "Yes, that was always going to be where this ended. I just didn't know it yet when you started building your case." He held Min Seok's gaze. "How long?" A silence. Then, 11 years. 11 years. Jamin absorbed the number. 3 years before Nyla left. 8 years before the prosecution package. 11 years of patience, of proximity, of performed loyalty so complete that it had fooled a man who had built an empire on reading people. "Why?" Jamin said. Not for the answer, for what the answer would tell him. Min Seok looked at him for a moment. "Because you would have kept going forever," he said, "until she stopped you or someone else did. And I decided to be the someone else." He paused, "with the outcome pointing at you instead of me." The corridor, the distance between them, 4 feet of polished institutional floor that represented everything between what they had been and what they were. Jamin felt his hands, felt the 38 years of decisions in his hands, felt the specific calculation he had run 100 times in this life. The calculation that said there was a solution to every problem of this kind, a physical solution, final and irrevocable, and that he had the capacity for it and had used it before and could use it now, and the man in front of him had earned it in every sense of the word. He felt his right hand move slightly. Then the courtroom door behind him opened and Nyla was there, coat on, leather folder in hand, having come looking for him because he had been in the corridor too long. She looked at Min Seok. She looked at Jamin. She looked at his hand. She walked to his side. She didn't touch him. She stood beside him and looked at Min Seok with the particular expression she had developed for looking at things that needed to be addressed directly and without flinching. "Mr. Min," she said. Her voice was level and professional and carried none of the weight it carried when she spoke to Jaemin. Your testimony begins tomorrow morning at 9. I'd recommend you spend the evening with your lawyer reviewing the routing documentation. A pause. You're going to need to be prepared for a very specific set of questions. Min Seok looked at her, then at Jae-min, then at her again. He did the calculation. She could see him doing it, the rapid assessment, the angle search. And he found what she had told Jae-min he would find. No angle. The Luxembourg document was in the record. The forensic accountant's testimony was in the record. Tomorrow morning, she was going to stand across from him with the full architecture of his 15-year construction laid out on paper, and she was going to take it apart in front of the jury with the precision of someone who had been building toward this specific moment since she was 11 years old, and told a man in a doorway that something was wrong. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Jae-min one more time, something in his face. Not quite an apology, not quite regret, something that lived in the space between what a person is and what they tell themselves they are. Then he turned and walked toward the corridor exit. Jae-min watched him go. His hand was still. His breathing was slow. Nyla stood beside him without speaking. The corridor was empty again. Somewhere near the main doors, the press situation had resolved, and the court officers were returning to their posts. Tomorrow, she said quietly. Not a question. He looked at the empty corridor where Min Seok had been. He looked at his hand. He looked at her. Tomorrow, he said. She nodded. She turned toward the exit. He fell into step beside her, and the leather folder was between them. And outside, the evening had come down cold over Seoul, and inside the folder were 22 pages of Luxembourg banking records that were going to change the shape of everything that came next. If she could stand in that courtroom tomorrow morning and do what she had spent 8 years preparing to do, and if Jae-min could hold for one more night, and if Min Seok made the choice she believed he was going to make when she put the evidence in front of him and closed the last remaining exit, and she was at the defense table at 8:47 in the morning when Min Seok walked in. She had been there since 7:30. The leather folder was open in front of her, the Luxembourg documents arranged in the specific sequence she had rehearsed 4 times the night before in the storage room at Kim Tae-sung's office. Lying on the cot with the ceiling above her and her lips moving slightly through the cross-examination she had been building in her head since she was 11 years old, standing in a doorway saying something is wrong. She had slept 2 hours. She had woken up knowing exactly what she was going to do and in what order and what each answer would require her to do next. She looked up when he entered. He was in a dark suit, same as yesterday. His lawyer was with him, a younger man who had the anxious, over-prepared energy of someone who had spent the night reviewing documentation he hadn't known existed 48 hours ago. Min Seok himself looked the way he always looked, put together, precise, the face of a man who controlled his surface the way he controlled everything else. He glanced at her as he passed the defense table. Just a glance. She held it for 1 second and then looked back at her documents. The gallery was fuller than yesterday. Word had moved through the press channels overnight. The Luxembourg document, the routing attribution, the fracture in the prosecution's evidentiary foundation. The journalists in the gallery had the forward-leaning quality of people who understood they were present at something that was going to matter. Han Dong-wook was at the prosecution table. He looked tired. He had spent the recess doing what a prosecutor does when unexpected evidence destabilizes a prepared case, rebuilding, redirecting, finding the remaining ground that holds. Nyla had anticipated his redirects. She had prepared for 3 different versions of how he would reframe the case after the Luxembourg document. She had her responses to all 3. Jae-min came in at 8:55. He sat at the defense table on her left and did not speak. She did not look at him. She was in the final minutes of a preparation that had taken 8 years, and she needed to stay inside it. He understood this. He sat still and looked at the front of the court, and she felt him beside her the way you feel a wall. Not constraining, just solid. Just there. The judge entered. The court rose. The court sat. The proceedings resumed. Han Dong-wook took 40 minutes to redirect the prosecution narrative after the Luxembourg revelation. He was skilled enough to do it without appearing rattled, acknowledging the defense's evidence as a complicating factor while reframing the core argument around the base criminal enterprise, which remained documented regardless of who had built the routing architecture. He was essentially arguing that the fabricated layer, even if proven, did not negate the genuine layer, that Jae-min Hwang had run a criminal organization for 18 years, and the question of who had additionally manufactured evidence against him did not change what the organization had actually done. It was a good argument. It was also the argument Nyla had expected. Kim Tae-sung's redirect was brief. He established clearly, for the record and for the jury, the distinction between what Jae-min had actually authorized and what the manufactured documents claimed he had authorized, the distinction being, in specific enumerable instances, the difference between criminal activity and atrocities. The fabricated layer had not just supplemented the genuine record, it had transformed it, had turned a criminal operation into something categorically more monstrous, carrying sentencing implications that moved from years to decades. Then Min Seok took the stand. He settled into the witness chair with the ease of a man who had been in difficult rooms before and understood how to occupy them without appearing to need them. His lawyer had clearly advised him overnight. There was a new quality to his stillness, a slightly more performed composure, the composure of someone who had been told to manage. Han Dong-wook's direct examination ran 40 minutes. Min Seok described his role in the organization with the careful, cooperative tone of a man fulfilling a legal arrangement. Not enthusiastic, not guilty, just factual. He confirmed the financial structures. He confirmed the shell corporations. He confirmed the pattern of operations. He described Jae-min's authority over all decisions with the flat precision of someone reading from a prepared text that happened to be spoken. Then Kim Tae-sung said, "The defense will cross-examine," and Nyla stood up. The gallery shifted. A small movement collective. The physical adjustment of a room recalibrating its attention. She walked to the position in front of the witness stand and set the Luxembourg documents on the lectern and looked at Min Seok, and he looked back at her. And for a moment it was just the two of them in the room, everything else at distance. "Mr. Min," she said, "you testified that the financial routing architecture used across the 14 shell corporations in this case was established under Mr. Hwang's direction." "That's correct." "You personally oversaw the implementation of that routing architecture." "I executed the structures as directed." "You're familiar with an entity called Meridian Consulting Partners." A pause. "Fractional. Almost invisible." "I'm aware of it. You're the director of record for Meridian Consulting Partners, as registered in Luxembourg in March of 2016. Your name, your handwriting on the registration documents." "I may have, yes or no, Mr. Min. Your name is on that document." A pause. "Yes." The routing architecture used in all 14 shell corporations in this case is identical to the routing architecture registered through Meridian Consulting Partners. She lifted the Luxembourg document and the forensic accountant's comparative analysis together. The defense has submitted both documents into evidence. The forensic accountant you heard from yesterday confirmed the structural identity of the two systems. Are you telling this court that the routing architecture you personally registered under your own name in Luxembourg was subsequently used to execute financial structures you claim were directed entirely by Mr. Hwang? Min Seok looked at her. She watched him do the calculation, the rapid, practiced assessment that was as natural to him as breathing, the angle search. "The architecture was a tool," he said carefully. "Tools can be used by multiple. A tool you invented, registered under your own name, in a jurisdiction Mr. Hwang has never operated in, using an entity structure that appears nowhere in the prosecution's evidence chain because it was never meant to be found." She set the documents down. "Because if it was found, it would establish that the person who built the mechanism that connects every shell corporation, in this case to your claimed evidence against Mr. Hwang, was you." "I was executing—" "Mr. Min." Her voice was steady, not loud, the kind of quiet that fills a room. "I want to ask you about a specific fund transfer. March 14th, 2019. A movement of funds from a Singapore subsidiary through Meridian's routing structure to a holding entity in Cayman. This transfer appears in the prosecution's evidence as an authorization carrying Mr. Hwang's signature." She looked up from the document. "On March 14th, 2019, Mr. Hwang was in Busan. I have hotel records, a restaurant receipt, and testimony from 3 individuals confirming his presence there from March 12th through March 16th. She paused. The authorization document carrying his signature for a transfer executed in Seoul on March 14th was physically impossible for him to have signed in person. and the digital signature metadata. She lifted the forensic analysis she had commissioned 6 weeks ago in New York. Shows the document was created on a device registered to your office. The gallery was completely still. Min Seok sat in the witness chair and looked at the documents, and his hands were flat on the arms of the chair, and his face, the professional surface, the controlled expression, the 15 years of managed presentation, was doing something it had not done in the 4 days of proceedings. It was working, visibly working, for the first time, to hold. "I want to remind you," Nyla said, "that you are under oath, and that providing false testimony compounds your existing legal exposure significantly." She paused. "I also want to remind you that the defense has submitted the Luxembourg registration, the forensic device analysis, the comparative routing documentation, and the Busan alibi materials into evidence. These are in the record. They exist regardless of what you say next." She looked at him directly. "So I'm going to ask you one more time. The authorization document for the March 14th transfer. Did Mr. Huang sign that document?" The silence in the courtroom had a physical quality. Cayman sat at the defense table without moving. Han Dong-wook had his hands flat on the prosecution table. The judge was watching the witness with the particular attention of someone who understood that the room had arrived at something that would not be walked back. Min Seok looked at Nyla. He looked at her for a long time. She looked back with the same eyes she had used on him at 11 years old in a doorway, reading him all the way through without flinching. He looked at Jae-min. Jae-min looked back. Nothing on his face. Just the same flat attention he had given 38 years of hard situations. No anger visible, no anticipation, just a man waiting for a truth that was already known to declare itself out loud. Min Seok looked at his hands on the arms of the chair. He looked at them for a moment the way you look at something you're deciding about. Then he looked at the jury. He looked at them the way a man looks at people who are going to determine the shape of his future, regardless of what he says. He said, "No." One word, into the stillness of the courtroom. "No," he said again, clearer, the professional register breaking for the first time into something that was simply a voice. "He didn't sign it, I did." He looked at his hands. "I signed it. I signed most of them. The ones that couldn't be forged convincingly, I signed and backdated. The ones that could be reproduced from existing samples, I used the reproduction." He stopped. The gallery was making a sound. Not loud, a collective exhaled breath. The sound of a room absorbing something. He kept looking at his hands. "The routing architecture is mine. The Luxembourg entity is mine. The manufactured authorization layer set." He stopped again. Something in his face moved, not guilt exactly, something more complicated and more honest. All of it. 11 years. He looked up, not at Nyla, not at Jae-min, at the front of the court, at nothing specific. 11 years building it, because he was never going to stop, and I needed the exit to point somewhere else. Han Dong-wook was on his feet. The judge's gavel came down. The gallery erupted into the noise of a room that had been holding itself still for too long. Nyla stood at the lectern and did not move. She let the room happen around her. She looked at Min Seok, who had put his face in his hands. Not dramatically, not for the gallery, just a man putting his face in his hands because the thing he had carried for 11 years had just been set down, and the weight of setting it down was its own kind of devastation. She looked at him with something that was not quite pity and not quite the satisfaction she had expected to feel, and was in fact neither of those things. Was something more like the exhaustion that comes when a very long effort finally ends and the body doesn't know yet what to do with the absence of strain. She turned. She walked back to the defense table. She sat down. She closed the leather folder. Beside her, Jae-min let out a breath. Just a breath, slow and long, the kind that comes from somewhere below the chest. She didn't look at him. He didn't look at her. They sat side by side in the noise of the breaking courtroom and let it move around them. The verdict came 4 days later. Not immediately. The proceedings continued. The redirect and the counter-testimony and the legal arguments and the jury deliberation that lasted 2 days. But it moved with the specific momentum of something already decided, the way proceedings move when the evidentiary ground has shifted so completely that the remaining steps are necessary but not uncertain. Han Dong-wook fought every inch of it. He was a man who had waited 12 years for this case, and he was not going to concede the manufactured layer without forcing the court to examine every detail of the defense's evidence. And he made them examine it, challenged the Luxembourg documents' chain of custody, challenged the forensic device analysis, challenged the Busan alibi on 3 separate procedural grounds. He won 2 of the 3 procedural challenges. He was still a good prosecutor fighting a case he had built carefully, and he made the defense earn every inch of the ground they took. But the ground shifted. It had already shifted. Min Seok's testimony was on the record and could not be unspoken, and the routing architecture was in the evidence. And the jury had sat through 4 days of forensic accounting, and they were not experts, but they were people, and they could follow a line drawn clearly enough from one point to another. I am in Huang. Not guilty on all fabricated authorization charges. Not guilty on the conspiracy charges built on the manufactured documentation layer. Guilty on 3 counts of the base criminal enterprise. The genuine layer, the 18 years of actual organized crime that existed independently of anything Min Seok had built on top of it. The genuine layer carried a sentence. It would require legal proceedings, fines, structured penalties, the dissolution of specific operations under court supervision. It was not an acquittal. It was not clean. It was the truth, which almost never is. Min Seok was remanded into custody pending trial on charges of conspiracy, fraud, forgery, evidence tampering, and organized financial crimes across 4 jurisdictions. His lawyer filed for bail, and the bail was denied. He was taken from the courtroom without drama. He walked the way he had always walked, controlled and precise, and he did not look back. Outside the courthouse, in the cold January air, it had come back around to January, the wheel of the year completing itself. There were cameras, there were journalists. There was the grinding noise of a public event concluding. Nyla stood on the courthouse steps with the leather folder under her arm and her coat buttoned against the cold, and she looked at the city. The cameras were there, but they were behind the barrier, and she was looking past them at the street, at the buildings, at the ordinary machinery of Seoul in winter. Jaemin stood beside her. "You need to make a statement," she said. "Your lawyers drafted something." "I know. Don't change it. What he drafted is right." She paused. "Acknowledgement of the genuine charges. No minimizing, no self-pity, just what it is." He looked at the city. "I know," he said again. She was quiet for a moment, then, "The sentencing will take time. The court supervision of the dissolution will take time. All of it will take time." She shifted the folder under her arm. "I'm staying." He looked at her. "I'm not going back to New York," she said. "There's a legal aid organization in Mapo that needs a director. And the shipping company's legal conversion from the criminal structure to a legitimate holding entity, that's going to require someone who understands both the criminal architecture and the legitimate legal framework." She paused. "I understand both." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved in his face. The particular movement of a man who has spent his life not allowing himself to need things deciding to acknowledge, just once, that he needed something and it was standing next to him on a courthouse step in January. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She cut him off cleanly, the way she had always cut him off when he was about to say something she had already heard the end of. "I want to." She paused. "Those are different things. You taught me that." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the city again, at the cold sky, at the street below the steps where a taxi was waiting, and beyond it the ordinary morning was in full progress, indifferent and relentless and continuing. "All right," he said. She nodded. She started down the steps. He fell into step beside her. Behind them, Kim Tae-sung was managing the cameras and the statements and the legal machinery of a verdict that would generate paperwork and proceedings for years. All of that was behind them. Ahead was the street. In the weeks that followed, the house in Gyeongbuk-dong changed in ways that were structural rather than cosmetic. The study, the room with the locked drawer, the folder, the 18 years of organized crime architecture, was cleared, not quickly, carefully. Each document reviewed, categorized, handed to the legal team or the court supervision process, or destroyed in the specific manner of things that should not persist. Nyla did most of it herself. She sat in the study for 3 days and went through everything, and she did not ask Jaemin to be there for it, which he understood was its own kind of mercy. The organizations began their conversion under court-supervised restructuring, The shipping companies first, they were the largest and the most viable as legitimate entities. The criminal activity layered over a functional business that moved actual cargo between actual ports. The criminal layer was stripped back. Lawyers, accountants, compliance officers. Employees who had operated in the gray zones of the organization were assessed individually. Some let go, some retained, some referred to the prosecution as part of cooperation agreements that Nyla negotiated with a precision that Han Dong-wook, watching from across the table in 3 separate meetings, eventually acknowledged with something that was almost respect. The legal aid organization in Mapo opened in April. It was small, 4 attorneys, a paralegal, a shared office space above a convenience store that was always too warm in the morning and too cold in the afternoon. Nyla worked there 3 days a week and spent the other 2 at the corporate restructuring. She was 26 years old and she was running 2 operations simultaneously, and she slept 6 hours a night and ate standing at the kitchen counter in the Seongbuk-dong house, which she still lived in the room that had been hers since she was 9 years old and had not changed much, which was a fact she found more comforting than she would have admitted to anyone. The homeless shelter opened in September. It was in Mapo, near the bridge, not under it, but near enough that the geography was intentional. Jaemin had not suggested the location. Nyla had. He had not argued. The shelter had 30 beds, a kitchen that ran 3 meals a day, a staff of 6, and a funding structure that Nyla had assembled from the legitimate assets of the converted shipping company, plus 3 foundation grants she had written herself at 4 in the morning over the course of 2 weeks. He went to see it the day it opened. He walked through the space, the beds, the kitchen, the common room with the particular institutional smell of new furniture and industrial cleaning products, and he stood in the common room for a moment and looked at the 30 beds and thought about a concrete hollow under a bridge in January, and a boy who liked fire trucks, and a girl who had refused his money. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. In November, 2 years after the verdict, Jae-min completed the court-supervised sentencing requirements, the fines, the supervised dissolution, the structured restitution to individuals and entities harmed by specific operations of the organization. The final hearing was brief, procedural. The judge read the completion of terms into the record. It was over. He walked out of the courthouse alone. Nyla was at the Mapo office that day, a case hearing she couldn't move. He had told her not to move it. He walked out into the November afternoon and stood on the steps and looked at the city and breathed, just breathed. It was cold. The sky had the particular gray of a city winter afternoon, layered and flat. He stood on the steps until the cold moved through his coat, which took about 4 minutes, and then he walked to the car. That evening she was already home when he arrived. She was in the kitchen with a bowl of something and a case file, the case file propped against a coffee cup, reading while she ate in the way she had eaten since she was 10 years old. Fueling the machine, not tasting. He sat across from her. Mrs. Park, who was 62 now, and still ran the house with the same compact efficiency she had always brought to it, put food in front of him. "Done," he said. She looked up from his case file. She looked at his face. Then she looked back at the file for a moment. She turned a page. Then she set it down. She looked at him. "How does it feel?" she said. He thought about it honestly, which was something he had been learning to do. To hold a question and let it find its actual answer rather than the efficient one. "Like something ending," he said. "Not the way I expected." "How did you expect?" "I don't know. I thought there'd be more." He stopped, looked for the word. "More weight at the end, like it would be heavier." She looked at him for a moment. "It's lighter because you didn't end it alone," she said. Not gently, just accurately, the way she said most things. "That changes the weight." He looked at her. And this woman who had been a 9-year-old girl who refused his money, and a 10-year-old reading financial listings, and an 11-year-old standing in a doorway, and a 15-year-old who had made him face a truth he didn't want to face, and who had gone across an ocean and come back with a leather folder and 15 years of preparation, and had stood in a courtroom and done what she had always been going to do. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him. "Don't," she said. "Nyla, you took me off a bridge in January. You sat in a hospital corridor all night. You told me the truth about what you were." She held his gaze. "You funded an education you knew was going to end your empire. You let me end it. She picked up her chopsticks. There's nothing to thank me for. He was quiet for a moment. The bridge, he said. She looked up. I want to go, this winter. He looked at her. Leave food, like we talked about, for whoever's there. She held his gaze. Something moved in her face. Something private and complete. The kind of expression you show only to people you've already let all the way in. Then she looked back at her bowl. Yes, she said quietly. They went in January, the 25th, the exact date, though neither of them had planned it to be and neither of them remarked on it when they realized. It was the kind of coincidence that isn't coincidence but doesn't need to be named, cold, the way it had been that first night, the Han River making its sounds under the ice. They stood at the edge of the embankment, 2 boxes of food, real food, rice and soup, and the kind of prepared meals that cost 4 times the convenience store equivalent. Enough for 6 people, more if it needed to stretch. Nyla had packed them herself that morning. They set the boxes at the edge of the concrete hollow where 2 children had sat 17 years ago. The hollow was empty tonight. Nyla looked at it for a moment, at the exact shape of the space, the way the concrete met the frozen ground, the particular geometry of a hiding place, and she didn't say anything, and her face didn't collapse, and she didn't need it to, because the thing she had carried from that hollow for 17 years had been set down gradually and honestly over the course of a long, difficult life. And what remained was not the absence of grief, but the presence of something that grief, processed all the way through, sometimes becomes. Jamin stood beside her. He looked at the bridge, at the city's reflected light on the ice, at the dark winter sky. He thought about 38 years, about every decision, about the one that mattered, which was not any of the criminal ones and not any of the strategic ones and not any of the ones he had been proud of. The one under this bridge, on a night like this one, when he had held out his hand to a 9-year-old girl who looked at him without looking away. She spoke without turning from the river. He would have been 26 this year, she said. Day. He stood beside her. He didn't say anything. He let it be what it was. I think he would have been a firefighter, she said. I think he actually would have done it. A pause, brief and clean. He was stubborn enough. Like his sister, Jamin said. She was quiet for a moment, then very softly. Like his sister. The river moved under the ice. The city moved above them. They stood under the bridge in the cold for a while longer. Not saying much, not needing to. 2 people who had traveled a very long way from the same starting point and arrived at something that had no clean name and didn't need one. Then they walked back to the car. The boxes of food stayed at the edge of the hollow, in the light of the bridge above, for whoever came to need them, which someone always did, which was the point, which had always been the point, from the very beginning, even before either of them understood it, that the greatest thing a person can build is not made of money or fear or the careful architecture of power, but of the moments when you stop calculating and hold out your hand to something that can't pay you back. Jamin had spent 38 years building the wrong thing. It had taken 1 night under a bridge and a girl who refused his money and 17 more years of the hardest work either of them had ever done to build the right one. The car pulled away from the bridge. The snow began to fall, and the city, as it always had, continued.